Hello everyone today. We're diving into a gruesome murder case that took place on Valentine's Day, 1999, in Tuen Mun Village, Hong Kong. A man was brutally murdered inside his own apartment, and what's even more horrifying is that the killer dismembered the victim's body into pieces. The news spread like wildfire through the community, leaving everyone shaken and terrified. So who was the killer? Why did they carry out such a cruel act? Let's find out together. The Tuen Mun police received a phone call from a man reporting that his friend had been missing for several days. He feared something terrible might have happened to him and asked the police to investigate. Acting on this report, officers went to an apartment building in Tai Hing Village, Tuen Mun, Hong Kong, where the missing man lived. As soon as they arrived at the front door, a strong, foul odor hit them. The officers immediately knew something was wrong. Without hesitation, they broke the lock and entered the apartment. Inside, the scene was chaotic. Bloodstains were splattered across the floors and walls. But what really caught the officers' attention was a rusty, old metal chest placed in the middle of the room. When they opened it, the entire police team recoiled in shock. A man in his 20s was curled up inside, missing his left arm and left leg. His body had been covered with a large amount of salt, clearly an attempt by the killer to slow down decomposition. According to the man who made the report, the victim's name was Chung Wai Man. A few days before the discovery of the body, Chung had suddenly gone out of contact with everyone. Even more suspicious, the lock on his apartment door had been changed. Once the situation became clear, the police immediately expanded their search to the entire area surrounding the apartment. Eventually, they found another part of the victim's remains in a pile of trash. Through their investigation, police learned that Chung Wai Man was a very introverted person. His daily life revolved around working at a tea house, then returning home to keep to himself. No one had ever heard of him having conflicts, fights, or any history of violence. What's more, there were no signs of forced entry at any of the doors or windows. That meant the killer had most likely come through the front door. This led the police to suspect that the killer was someone the victim knew. Based on this new lead, the police shifted their focus to Chung Wai Man's girlfriend, Di Pao Wan. An arrest warrant was immediately issued, and a full-scale manhunt was launched across the region. However, by that time, Di Pao Wan had already vanished without a trace. Just as the investigation seemed to be hitting a dead end, a man suddenly walked into the police station and voluntarily confessed to having played a part in the case. His name was Lau Quan Wadi Pao Wan's ex-boyfriend. A few days earlier, Di had called Lau, asking him to help her transport some items to Yuen Long. Believing it was just a routine favor, Lau agreed without hesitation. Everything went smoothly at first, and there were no red flags. But on their way back, Di suddenly told him that she had accidentally broken a knife that belonged to a friend, and she needed to buy a replacement. After returning to Tuen Mun, Lau Quan Hua went out and bought a new knife for her, thinking nothing of it. It wasn't until he saw the wanted poster that it hit him he may have unknowingly assisted a murderer. Shocked and overwhelmed, Lau tried calling Di, but she didn't answer. Feeling helpless and desperate to stop someone he once loved from making things worse, he did the only thing he could. He turned her in. Using the information provided by Lau, the police quickly tracked down Di Pao Wan's hideout. They surrounded the area and launched a swift operation. On February 26th, she was arrested and brought back to the station. The news of her arrest sent shockwaves through the entire Hong Kong community. No one could believe that a young and beautiful girl like her could be the one behind such a cold-blooded murder. But the roots of this tragedy could be traced back 5 years earlier. In 1994, at the time, Di Pao Wan was just a 14-year-old high school student. Because of her good looks, she caught the eye of a talent scout from the entertainment industry. They invited her to film commercials, which quickly made her a local celebrity in Tuen Mun. Her sudden fame drew the attention of many admirers. Men started pursuing her, but she rejected them all until one day, a chubby young man managed to win her heart. A schoolmate of Jewel Dai worked part-time at a tea house every weekend. One day, She visited friends there and happened to meet Victor Zhang, a server at the tea house. From the moment he saw her, Victor was deeply struck by Jewel's beauty. He soon reached out to her through a mutual friend, and over time, they grew close. Victor often invited Jewel and her friends to hang out at his apartment. Jewel, young and inexperienced, didn't think much of it. To her, it was just harmless fun and friendship. But what she didn't realize was that Victor had harbored sinister intentions toward her from the start. One day, when they were alone, Victor forcibly assaulted her. In such a situation, most people would report it to the police. But Jewel, instead of going to the authorities, made the shocking choice to start a romantic relationship with Victor. A few months later, Jewel began feeling unwell and visited a hospital. There, she discovered she was pregnant. Too young to confide in her parents, she turned to Victor for support. But when she told him about the pregnancy, he callously denied responsibility and demanded she get an abortion. The doctor warned them that Jewel, not yet 15 and still physically immature, could face life-threatening risks from the procedure. Terrified by this, Victor reluctantly agreed to let her keep the baby. In May 1995, Jewel gave birth to a son, whom she named Brave Rain Zhang. Still a minor and a student, she was clearly unprepared to raise a child and pinned her hopes on Victor. But even the sight of their adorable son didn't soften him. Victor decided to abandon the baby at the hospital gates. Jewel's desperate, tearful pleas finally forced him to agree to let the child stay in their home. During this time, Jewel juggled raising her son and continuing her studies. She gave up her chance at university to care for Brave Rain, and this sacrifice planted the seeds of resentment in her heart. As they lived together, Victor Zhang's true colors emerged. His fiery temper led to frequent shouting matches, and he even physically lashed out at Jewel. Their relationship began to crack under the strain, and Jewel grew to regret staying with him. Desperate to escape, she started hiding her identity as a single mother and secretly dated other men. On Lunar New Year's Eve in 1998, Jewel met a taxi driver named Bright Lou at a market. They quickly fell head over heels, but fearing Victor would find out, Jewel broke things off after a few months. Throughout their romance, Bright remained unaware of her past or that she was the mother of a 3-year-old. After the breakup, he continued to pine for her, but Jewel, unfazed, moved on to a new chapter. One evening at a street food stall in Yellowhaven Port, she crossed paths with a firefighter named Steadfast Stone. Once again, Jewel sparked a secret romance with him, but Victor began to notice a shift in her behavior. She no longer doted on their son as she once did, and her demeanor grew colder. Suspecting infidelity, Victor's doubts fueled frequent arguments between them. On February 9th, 1999, Victor invited his friend Loyal Liu out for drinks. Over their conversation, Victor shared his suspicions about Jewel and sought advice. In truth, Loyal had seen Jewel with other men, acting intimately, on multiple occasions, but had kept quiet to avoid ruining their relationship. When Victor pressed him, Loyal could no longer hold back. He candidly revealed everything he knew, even showing Victor photos of Jewel with other men. Hearing this, Victor's rage boiled over. He couldn't believe that after years together, his girlfriend had betrayed him. Feeling his pride as a man shattered, he resolved to confront Jewel and settle things once and for all. As expected, when Jewel Dees and Victor Zhang met, their conversation quickly erupted into conflict. Victor began attacking Jewel, and in a desperate bid to defend herself, she grabbed whatever was within reach: knives, an iron hammer, even a chair. Her fierce resistance caught Victor off guard. He never imagined the usually docile Jewel could fight back with such ferocity. Overwhelmed, Victor was soon knocked to the ground. Blinded by years of pent-up rage, Jewel unleashed all her suppressed pain and resentment, striking him relentlessly. Only when her emotions settled did she realize the gravity of her actions. But it was too late. Victor lay dead at her feet. Panicked, Jewel knew she had to dispose of the body as quickly as possible. But as a first-time killer, she was at a loss for where to start. After careful thought, she turned to Bright Lou for help. Despite their breakup, Bright had never stopped caring for her, and they had stayed in touch. It was only now that he learned the woman he loved was a single mother and now a murderer. The police later discovered that Bright's initial statement wasn't entirely truthful. At first, he tried to convince Jewel to turn herself in, but she broke down, recounting the years of abuse she endured from Victor. Moved by her story, Bright not only abandoned his efforts to persuade her, but also sympathized deeply and agreed to help her dispose of Victor's body. He saw a personal gain in this without Victor. He believed he could rekindle their romance. Unbeknownst to him, Jewel was already involved with another man, and Bright was merely a tool in her scheme. They planned to bury Victor's body first and later find a chance to dump it elsewhere. But their plan unraveled when Bright unexpectedly reported the crime to the police. Realizing he couldn't continue down this criminal path, Bright turned himself in, a decision that spared him from legal consequences. According to Loyal Liu, during the time of the incident, he had visited Victor Zhang's home but was turned away by Jewel D. He heard Victor's cries for help but hesitated to call the police, fearing it would stir trouble for his friend, especially since he knew the couple had been clashing recently. As an outsider, Loyal didn't want to meddle too deeply in their family affairs, so he chose not to report anything. It wasn't until days later, when he couldn't reach Victor, that he grew alarmed and finally contacted the authorities. If Loyal had acted sooner, he might have saved Victor's life. The forensic report revealed that while Victor's body bore numerous wounds, none were severe enough to be fatal. The true cause of death was excessive blood loss. Although Jewel had killed someone, her actions were deemed impulsive, driven by rage. In 2000, the court convicted her of manslaughter and illegal disposal of a body, sentencing her to 10 years in prison. Despite the decade behind bars, Jewel would only be 30 upon release, and she clung to dreams of remarrying and building a better life. The ordeal, however, left a deep scar on her once obedient son, Brave Rain Zhang. Previously a bright, kind, and studious boy, he became withdrawn and rebellious. He lost interest in school, spent his days wandering aimlessly, and eventually veered onto a dark path. Brave Rain was later convicted of aiding drug traffickers and sentenced to 5 years and 8 months in prison. If Jewel had sought justice through the law when Victor assaulted her years ago, their story might have unfolded differently. Perhaps she and her son would have been spared the tragic fate that led them both to prison and such a bitter end. But sadly, in this world, there are no what-ifs. Time moves forward, and the past cannot be undone.
Singapore has always been a dream destination for many people, not only because of its remarkable economic development, high quality of life, and advanced education system, but also due to its safe and friendly living environment. However, like anywhere else, injustice exists and social disparities are still present, especially for migrant workers. Today, let us delve into a heartbreaking case that happened in this country, a tragedy that continues to stir public outrage. Piang Gaydon was born on June 13, 1992, in a small village in Myanmar, one of the country's poorest regions. This village, located in a remote mountainous area, had no doctors. If someone fell ill, it would take at least 2 hours of driving to reach the nearest hospital. Piang's parents, who were farmers, passed away when she was about 4 or 5 years old, leaving behind 10 orphan children. Out of the 10 siblings, 5 tragically died in the following years, leaving Piang and 4 others to fend for themselves. To care for her younger siblings, Piang dropped out of school at the age of 15. She and her siblings survived by growing their own vegetables. Despite their hardships, the siblings believed that with effort, life could improve. In 2013, Piang fell in love and became pregnant. However, the man abandoned her before the baby was born. As a single mother, Piang's life grew even more difficult. She worked tirelessly to support her family, even trying her hand at construction work, but her income was insufficient to cover their needs. At this point, a neighbor suggested that she work abroad, where wages were significantly higher. Hearing this, Piang decided to go to Singapore, a developed country, to seek employment. She chose Singapore because of its fast-paced lifestyle, where busy residents often hired domestic helpers for household chores. The demand for domestic workers in Singapore was high, with numerous employment agencies facilitating such jobs. Moreover, the wages in Singapore were better than in most other countries, making it a preferred destination for foreign workers seeking better opportunities. According to Singapore's Ministry of Manpower, at the time, the country's population was about 5.54 million, with around 230,000 domestic workers, constituting roughly 5% of the population. Most of these workers came from India, Indonesia, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and Piang's homeland, Myanmar. Although Piang was eager to work in Singapore, the country required foreign domestic workers to be at least 23 years old. At 22, Piang bribed an agency to falsify her documents, enabling her to secure employment in Singapore. In May 2015, Piang left her 2-year-old son in the care of her siblings and traveled alone to Singapore. She arrived in this foreign land with the hope of saving enough money within 3 years to return home by land and improve her family's life. Hell on earth. Upon arriving in Singapore, Piang, like other domestic workers, attended a series of training courses. Shortly after, on May 28th, she was hired by an Indian family living in a 3-bedroom home in Bishan, Singapore. Owning such a home in land-scarce Singapore indicated a relatively affluent lifestyle. The household consisted of 36-year-old homemaker Gayatri Murugan, her husband Kevin, a police officer, their 4-year-old daughter, and a newborn son. Also living with them were Gayathiri's 57-year-old mother, Prema, and 2 other tenants. The family had previously employed 4 other domestic helpers, none of whom stayed long. Piang moved into the household with just a few belongings. While Singaporean law required employers to provide free accommodation for foreign domestic workers, the crowded house left Piang with minimal privacy. She had to sleep either in the storage room or a small corner of the house. Exhausted but determined to support her family, she endured the challenges and began her new life. Initially, Piang seemed content with her new job, unaware that it was the beginning of a nightmare. Living with the Gayathiri family felt like being imprisoned. Aside from critical tasks, Piang was not allowed to leave the house. While other domestic workers in Singapore often gathered on their days off to connect with fellow compatriots, Piang was never seen at such gatherings. No one knew the extent of her suffering or the cruelty she endured. Gayathiri prohibited Piang from using a phone to prevent any contact with the outside world and denied her even a single day off. Believing Piang to be unhygienic, Gayathiri forced her to wear multiple masks while doing household chores, including during meals. If Piang ate too slowly, she would be scolded. As a result, Piang often had to force food down quickly. Prema, instead of intervening, joined her daughter in mistreating Piang. By October 2015, Piang had been working for the family for 5 months. The psychological abuse had escalated into physical violence. Any minor mistake or mood swings from Gayathiri or her mother would result in Piang being beaten, slapped, or punched. Despite her petite frame, Piang bore the pain silently, thinking of her family waiting for her in Myanmar. Singaporean regulations mandated that employers send domestic workers for health checkups every 6 months. During these checkups in the 6th and 10th months, doctors noticed bruises on Piang's body. Each time, the family claimed that Piang was clumsy and frequently injured herself. The employment agency, suspicious of these claims, conducted investigations but found nothing unusual. They also interviewed Piang twice but failed to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Kevin frequently complained to Singapore's Ministry of Manpower about Piang's slow work and poor attitude. However, when asked if they wanted to replace her, Kevin refused. The family had no intention of letting go of someone as compliant as Piang, who never retaliated despite the abuse. Over time, Piang endured increasing abuse from the family she worked for. They allowed her only a single slice of bread and a glass of water per day, with less than 5 hours of sleep each night. Despite her immense suffering, Pyong remained silent. During her time working for Gaia Theory, she secretly called her family several times, but never disclosed the abuse she was facing. On July 12, 2016, Pyong made another clandestine call to her family, but this time was different. She expressed feeling extremely uncomfortable and longing to return home, hoping to leave by August. To return her hometown in Myanmar, Pyong needed to fly from Singapore to Yangon, travel to a northern city, and then take a bus to her rural village, a journey that would take several days. August coincided with the monsoon season, making mountain roads particularly hazardous. Her family advised her to wait until the dry season, but Pyong seemed undeterred by the danger, only concerned about lacking the money for travel. Her family assumed that her strong desire to return stemmed from missing her son or struggling to adjust to life abroad. They didn't realize the dire reality of her situation. Unfortunately, Gaia Theory discovered this phone call. Naturally, she wouldn't let Pyong escape so easily. Gaia Theory's cruelty escalated, such as dousing Pyong with water or pressing a hot iron against her skin. To prevent Pyong from escaping, Gaia Theory even tied her hands to a window grill and forced her to sleep on the floor. By July 25th, Pyong had been working for the family for over a year. On that day, Gaia Theory opened the fridge and accused Pyong of stealing food after noticing something seemed missing. She then began another brutal beating. Despite Pyong's desperate pleas for mercy, Gaia Theory showed no intention of stopping. The following morning, for reasons unknown, Gaia Theory resumed the assault. Pyong, already weak from the previous day's beating, could hardly defend herself. Gaia Theory paid no heed to her frailty, dragging Pyong by her hair and ruthlessly stomping on her head and neck, causing severe injuries. Still unsatisfied, when Pyong stopped responding, Gaia Theory tightened her grip around her neck. Believing Pyong was pretending to be dead to avoid chores, the heartless woman refused to stop. A tragic death. By 7:30 a.m., after her husband Kevin left for work, Gaia Theory and her mother realized something was wrong. They attempted to revive Pyong, but to no avail. Around 9:30 a.m., following her mother's suggestion, Gaia Theory called a nearby clinic, reporting that their maid had collapsed in the kitchen and requested a doctor's visit. The clinic advised her to call an ambulance, but Gaia Theory refused. Left with no choice, the clinic sent a doctor to their home. While waiting, they dressed Pyong in relatively clean clothes and moved her to the living room sofa. Upon arrival, the doctor examined Pyong and declared her dead. Feigning surprise, Gaia Theory and her mother claimed Pyong had been moving just moments earlier. The doctor immediately contacted the hospital and the police. When medical personnel arrived, they officially pronounced Pyong, aged 24, dead. An autopsy revealed Pyong's cause of death as oxygen deprivation and brain damage caused by trauma to her neck. Additionally, 78 injuries, both new and old, were found on her body. Standing at 145 centimeters tall, Pyong weighed 39 kilograms upon arriving in Singapore, but had withered to just 24 kilograms due to severe malnutrition. Forensic doctors noted that even if Pyong had been saved, she likely would have died from starvation shortly thereafter. Justice for a heinous crime. Following the incident, Gaia Theory, aged 36, and her mother Prema, 58, were arrested the next day and charged with first-degree murder. If convicted, they faced the death penalty. Both were remanded for psychiatric evaluation, a process that lasted 4 years. Finally, in April 2020, Gaia Theory was diagnosed with 2 mental disorders, including obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, which she had suffered from for years. Gaia Theory's obsessive cleanliness and postpartum depression following the birth of her children compounded into a worsening propensity for violence, ultimately leading to Pyong's death. Based on these findings, her charges were reduced from first-degree murder to culpable homicide not amounting to murder, one of Singapore's most serious offenses outside of capital punishment. Conviction could result in life imprisonment or up to 20 years in prison, along with caning or a fine. However, As a woman, Gayathiri would not face caning. On February 23, 2021, the case was brought before Singapore's High Court. Gayathiri, now 40, pleaded guilty to culpable homicide and 27 charges related to abusing and injuring Piong. The trial also addressed 87 other allegations of maid abuse. The deputy prosecutor argued for a life sentence, emphasizing the severity of the case and describing Gayathiri as a monstrous figure who deserved no leniency. Doctors from the clinic testified that Piong's BMI at the time of death was 11, a dangerously low level typically seen in patients with advanced tuberculosis or cancer. This left Piong unable to endure the violence inflicted upon her. Meanwhile, the defense argued that Gayathiri's long-standing mental illnesses and the trauma of miscarrying her third child in February 2016 exacerbated her condition, leading to her violent outbursts against Piong. They pleaded for leniency, citing her mental state. Ultimately, the court sentenced Gayathiri to 14 years in prison, despite her continuous pleas for a lighter sentence, promising self-care and treatment. The High Court judge upheld the decision after carefully considering the testimonies from all sides. On April 29, 2021, the day of the court's final verdict, Gayathiri suddenly decided to change her defense lawyer. The new lawyer negotiated with the prosecution to downgrade her charge from first-degree culpable homicide to second-degree culpable homicide, with a maximum sentence of less than 15 years in prison. Gayathiri also requested the court to issue a gag order preventing the press from publishing her name, claiming it was to protect her two children. However, due to the abrupt change in legal representation, the hearing was postponed to June 21, 2021. On June 21st, the defense lawyer again pleaded for leniency for Gayathiri, arguing that Piong's poor hygiene habits and the stress of childcare had pushed Gayathiri into a state of tension. He claimed that her obsessive-compulsive disorder and accumulated pressure led to the abusive behavior. He also pointed out that the family had hired 4 other domestic helpers in the past, none of whom were mistreated, suggesting that Piong was an exception. According to Gayathiri, Piong worked too slowly, ate excessively, and failed to maintain hygiene, which triggered the abuse. The prosecution, however, refused to back down. They argued that during the entire period, Gayathiri showed only fleeting remorse upon hearing the verdict. As a result, they pushed for a life sentence or at least 27 years in prison. In the end, Gayathiri was convicted of first-degree culpable homicide and sentenced to 30 years in prison. The judge noted that while she had not mistreated previous domestic helpers and her mental health issues were a factor, her condition had improved with treatment. The diagnosis showed she no longer posed a threat to society, leading the judge to rule out the death penalty or a life sentence. Despite this, Gayathiri's attempts to evade responsibility highlighted her lack of genuine remorse. All her appeals were ultimately rejected. In a desperate and almost absurd move, after her final appeal was denied, she sought to contact Singapore's Prime Minister to plead for clemency, claiming she could not die in prison as her life also belonged to her mother. As for Prema, Gayathiri's 63-year-old mother, she faced 50 charges. The police hoped for a sentence of at least 15 to 16 years, as her mistreatment of Piong was barely less severe than her daughter's. Prema had even dragged Piong around the house like a doll. Meanwhile, her defense lawyer sought a prison term of less than 10 years, describing her as a gentle grandmother in the eyes of her grandchildren. He argued that Prema's actions were merely the result of frustration after hearing her daughter's complaints about Piong. He also claimed Prema showed kindness by occasionally giving Piong food and applying medicine to her injuries. The judge, however, found Prema's cruel treatment of Piong to be undeniable. Although Piong could no longer testify, surveillance footage captured the cold and heartless actions of both women leading up to Piong's death. The evidence showed them slapping her, pushing her to the ground, stepping on her, pouring water on her, beating her with a belt, and hitting her with a chopping board. Gayathiri even assaulted Piong in front of her children. With such overwhelming evidence, Prema was sentenced to 14 years in prison. In June 2023, Her sentence was extended to 17 years after it was revealed that she had instructed her son-in-law, Kevin, to dismantle the surveillance cameras to destroy evidence. The damning surveillance footage came to light thanks to Prema's son and daughter-in-law, who handed it over to the police. After realizing the cameras had recorded everything, Prema tried to hide the evidence. She directed Kevin to dismantle the cameras and gave the hard drive to her daughter-in-law, Isabella, without disclosing its contents. Prema simply told Isabella to dispose of it. Unaware of its importance, Isabella gave the camera to her husband, Prema's son, who then passed it to a friend for safekeeping. When a police visited Isabella's home, she and her husband voluntarily handed over the hard drive. This provided critical evidence to charge the family. Kevin, Gayathiri's husband and a former police officer, was suspended from duty following the incident in 2016. He faced 5 charges, including 4 for voluntarily causing grievous harm to Pyong. If convicted, he could face over 10 years in prison, caning, or fines. The 5th charge accused him of giving false statements during the investigation to protect his wife and mother-in-law. At Prema's urging, Kevin dismantled the cameras and claimed it had been done months earlier at the request of other tenants. This blatant attempt to obstruct justice only further cemented his role in the crime. In July 2023, 44-year-old Kevin denied all allegations against him. To prepare additional evidence, he posted a bail of 15,000 Singapore dollars. On November 30th of the same year, the court released CCTV footage showing Gayathiri and Prema repeatedly abusing Pyong. In the video, Kevin is seen standing outside, watching passively without intervening. Kevin's trial is still ongoing. In January 2020, Kevin officially divorced his wife. This case has sparked widespread outrage across Singapore and even internationally. Mrs. Wu, a neighbor of Gayathiri, shared her observations. Every domestic worker hired by Gayathiri's family was always masked. When Pyong first came to their household, Mrs. Wu noticed that she was neither overweight nor underweight. However, just a few months later, when she saw Pyong again, the girl had lost a shocking amount of weight. At first, Mrs. Wu thought Gayathiri had hired a new helper. Another neighbor, Sally, revealed that Pyong looked as frail as a 10-year-old child, with bruises visible on her face. She also knew that Kevin was a police officer, so when 4 or 5 officers came to the scene on the day of the incident, she assumed they were Kevin's friends visiting. Other neighbors were equally shocked by Pyong's death, as there had been no unusual noises that night, and nothing seemed amiss in their daily lives. Unforgettable wounds. Singapore's Minister of Labor urged everyone to report any signs of abuse involving foreign domestic workers to the authorities immediately to prevent similar tragedies from occurring. The ones most heartbroken and devastated were undoubtedly Pyong's family back in Myanmar. After the incident, her brother flew to Singapore to bring her body back home. All expenses and insurance payments were covered by the Ministry of Labor in Singapore. Many Singaporeans actively participated in donation drives to support Pyong's grieving family, particularly her young child. These efforts raised a total of 30,000 Singapore dollars, collected by a welfare organization for foreign women. The funds were handed over to the Myanmar embassy in Singapore to be safeguarded as an educational fund for Pyong's son in the future. Pyong's brother stated that he would wait until Pyong's son was older before telling him the truth about his mother's death. He vowed to teach the boy to live with kindness, saying, "Hatred only breeds more hatred." 2 months after Pyong's death, a new episode of the investigative documentary series 101 is aired, focusing on the lives of domestic workers in Singapore. It highlighted other harrowing cases of workers being confined, sexually assaulted, or exploited by unscrupulous recruitment agencies, problems that are sadly not uncommon. However, there are also stories of workers who were fortunate enough to find kind employers and lead better lives. This case sent shockwaves throughout society, prompting deep reflection on the plight of migrant laborers. These individuals leave their homelands, carrying dreams of improving their families' lives, only to arrive in unfamiliar cities, or even countries they've never known, where their realities often contrast starkly with their hopes. Tragic cases like Pyong's expose the injustices and abuse they sometimes endure. These workers, who occupy the lowest rungs of society, have dreams, families, pain, and hope. They are not faceless labor machines. Every corner of society should shine a light on them and accord them the dignity and fairness they deserve, not leave them to languish in darkness. And with that, today's case comes to an end. What are your thoughts on this story? Share your opinions in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Your support motivates us to produce new videos every day. For now, goodbye, and see you next time.